that maybe we should talk about. I'm going to start actually by doing something that Jesus did quite a bit. I'm not claiming to be Jesus, but in that tradition. And as you hear these teaching stories of Jesus, he's saying, "You've heard it said, but I say to you," which is Jesus taking upon himself the role of teacher. And of course, in the book of Matthew, Jesus is cast as the second Moses or greater than Moses. So there's always this reference to the teaching that exists, and then the attempt to take it deeper, as we hear today. I mean, he said, "Don't commit adultery," and Jesus is saying, well, actually, you have to pay attention even to the inner dimensions of how you're looking at the world and how you're feeling about the world. So it's not behavior only. It's a deeper, more comprehensive teaching about just the disposition of our hearts. So I'm going to start by, "You have heard it said in the Book of Common Prayer, but I say to you." And the collect, the lessons were too long today, so the collect got excluded from the lessons. And it may seem like a trivial point, but let me say to you, I say to you, it's not. The collect starts, "O God, the strength of all who put their trust in you, mercifully accept our prayers." And then here's the kicker. "And because in our weakness we can do nothing good without you, give us the help of your grace." Because in our weakness we can do nothing good without you. This is exactly, profoundly, absolutely wrong. It is not our weakness. I mean, what's the implication of that? If we weren't so weak, we could act without God. But is it not the entire spirituality that we've been trying to develop? O God, in whom we live and move and have our being. And Paul talking constantly about the indwelling spirit that is actually the very energy by which we live and act. It is in no way a weakness of the human being that we can't be good without God. Exactly the opposite. It is our human glory that we are open from the interior reality of our life. We are open and sustained by the presence of God, and that we, as Paul says today, we work together with God. It's not a weakness, it's our strength and our glory. And the prayer book does things like this. It gets pious, like somebody's just writing out pious phrases. They sound good, but if you listen to them, you go, oh man, this is just promoting this sinful dream of a separate humanity. I want to exist by myself. God, I don't want anything to do with you. I mean, that's the sinful dream of humanity. And the prayer book kind of puts it right there as if that's a good thing. No, it's really, how can we open ourselves more and more to the inward presence of God's Spirit and work together with that Spirit? So, you have heard it said, but I say to you. So that's enough of the prayer book. And just one other note. And this, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's actually fairly important. When Jesus refers to hell, it has nothing to do with hell as it has been developed in the subsequent 2,000 years. It's a literal place. It's Gehenna. It's a valley outside of Jerusalem. And Gehenna is the Greek translation of what was in the Hebrew, the Valley of Ben Hinnom. And the Valley of Ben Hinnom is famous or infamous as the site indelibly associated with child sacrifice. So in Jeremiah you hear, "Therefore, behold, the days shall come, Yahweh, that it shall no more be called Topheth, nor the valley of the son of Hinnom, Ben Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they shall bury in Topheth until there be no more place to bury." I mean, it was a place of great violence. And what Jesus was making of that symbol, or that historical reference, I'm not quite sure. But it's not an internal place of torment as it has been later developed in Christian theology. And there are many voices, and I would count mine among them, who are raising questions about the legitimacy of hell itself as a place of eternal torment. Those questions are coming from all corners of Christianity, and so let them also be asked here. But what the reference in the gospel refers to is this legendary place of child sacrifice, and how profoundly that represents a turning away from God. Okay, so we've got these teachings, and these teachings are not particularly straightforward and easy. The thing I want to say is that God is not a speed trap. We all know what a speed trap is. It has nothing to do with safe conditions. It's just an arbitrary, let's make the speed limit 15 here, because nobody needs to drive 15, except that we say you should drive 15, and if you don't, we're going to issue you a ticket and you'll have to pay us money. So the speed trap is a kind of an arbitrary law that gets set up, and if you violate it, you pay a penalty. And because so many things in our world work that way, there's a tendency to think God works that way as well. And I think of that, how I go back to the story in the garden, saying, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for on the day that you eat, you will die. We translate that into, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Do not violate my commandment, for on the day that you do, I will kill you. And that's not what God says. Even the teaching about, this shift in human consciousness, dividing the world into good and evil. The scripture says you will die. You are not going to be able to sustain that. And I think of that also in this teaching about divorce. And the teachings about divorce are sprinkled through the Gospels, and I am divorced, and many others are divorced. And is this a law that we have broken and thus are subject to punishment? Or is in the heart of the teaching, Jesus really speaking more psychologically and spiritually about how complex our hearts get with multiple relationships and what we are able actually to bear? The teachings, if they're real teachings, they are for our good. They are for our good. They are trying to alert us to the ways that we get in trouble spiritually. And so what else do we have? We've got these teachings that, again, Jesus was not a literalist. If your eye offends thee, pluck it out. If your hand offends thee, cut it off. Woe to the scriptural literalist in these moments. And Jesus, I think, is being just as emphatic as he possibly could, sort of presenting to us the specter of mutilation in terms of, don't you know, if you're not paying attention to what is most important in this human life, you're already mutilated. You're operating with less than your full faculties. And also, what I am talking about to you, says Jesus to us, what I am talking about to you is so important that you cannot let anything become a higher priority for you. Nothing. And Jesus says this all the time, whoever loves father, mother, brother, sister more than me, not worthy of me. Again, that's Jesus talking about his spiritual project, his invitation to join in this spirit of God and live from that place. Nothing can be a higher priority. Not family. If your eye, if the way you see the world causes you to lose sight of God's presence in all things, you're seeing it wrong. It's of no use to you. if your actions are in service of a vision that is less than God's presence in all things, they're worthless. Cut it off. It's of no use. And so Jesus is being just urgent, urgent, urgent. And then this funny thing about going to court with your accuser. Brian McLaren, I've not read widely, but I probably should because he seems to be saying a lot of things that I'm pretty sympathetic. Brian McLaren makes this interesting point. He says, and judge for yourselves whether this is a matter of sort of current importance. He says, one of the emphases of this teaching about if you insult or if you call someone a fool, he says, the teaching is not just about the way we are violent in our behavior. It's also drawing attention to the way we are violent with words. And not to be casual or careless about the way words also can express violence. And I mean, it hardly needs comment, but I would say we are now in this realm of incredibly violent, assaultive, accusatory language that just fills our public discourse. And as wherever we stand, as a Christian people, let us recognize that that is not appropriate, that it is both a sign of a kind of spiritual lostness, and it invites all of us to become more and more lost. Some of the situations, I think, that Jesus is talking about might be compared to quicksand, where if you wriggle around, you just get deeper and deeper and deeper into the quicksand. And I think that's, you know, the what Jesus is referring to in this teaching on anger. We might someday pay some attention to the ways that dwelling on negative thoughts within our own hearts is very much like prayer. We could actually learn quite a bit about prayer by watching the way you turn in your heart to, say, the way somebody has offended you, or some situation that fills you with indignation or anger, and in effect, when we do that in our hearts, we are praying. But we're praying to this negative energy. We're like opening our hearts to it. And you all know how it kind of, little ember there. You know, and it just grows. And I honestly don't know why it's so much easier to pray that way than to hold in your heart that kind of, if you love those who love you, so what? Everybody does that, but love your enemies. And trying to open your heart to that vision of reality in which it is even possible to imagine loving your enemy. That's a different kind of prayer, but in a sense, we're praying all the time. What are we praying to? And so Jesus is saying, watch those inward inclinations of your heart, and don't spend time dwelling on things that, if you step back just one step, you will be able to recognize them as dark and negative and destructive of your own peace and well-being, and leading you to act in relation to others in ways that you will regret. Don't pray to bad things. Pray to God. Open your heart to God. And that may be the last word. When we pray, there are lots of prayers that we can offer. And we are all uncertain enough, and in many ways unhappy enough, that we can respond to the world around us by dwelling on things